Hi friends, we continue our lessons with chapter 2. Organisms differ in their body structure. Some of organisms contain only one cell, such as bacteria, certain types of mosses, simple plants, fungi like yeast, amoeba, euglena, and some other types. This type of organism, we call them unicellular organisms. Uni is one cellular organisms which made up of one single cell. The bodies of some other type of organism consist of many specialized cells which we call them multicellular organisms, which function connectively in the form of functional tissues. And cells, specialized cells in multicellular organisms, make an organization to form group of cells with similar function. We call them tissue. The tissues function one another in a great harmony to build the body of organism. Like cells organization to form tissue, tissue organized working with another to make organs, different organs have organization or share some function with one another to make organ system, and all organ system makes body of organism. The cells of a tissue may be diverse sometimes, and in definition we may say that there are a group of similar cells, but generally in tissues there are cells in different shape with different functions. In addition, a tissue contains intercellular substance may have different form in different tissues. A tissue with a simple definition can be defined as a group of similar cells which are all specialized to perform a certain function in addition to certain cellular substance. The study of tissue known as histology, as we study in chapter 1, the study of cell was known as cytology, but on a group of cell tissue we call this branch of biology as histology. In this chapter we studied two main types of tissue as plant tissues and animal tissue. Plant tissue is a group of cells that vary in shape and size, because plant tissue are generally cells are different in shape and size to perform specific functions. The body of structure of early plants consists of one cell. In previous slide you may remember we said some kind of mosses consist of one single cell. The cell has the capability of performing various basic functions like nutrition, breathing, and however one moss consists of one single cell but can do all life activities which is performed by multicellular organisms. On the other hand, more mature plants, they have huge number of different types of cells which we call them multicellular organisms, and organization between these cells to form different kind of tissues for various plant functions. Formation and distribution of plant tissue. The various type of tissue that build the different organs of plant are developed from the cells or the apical meristematic tissues, which lie basically at the growing points of the roots and stems of the mature plants. Meristematic tissue is the primary tissue in plant body. We know each organism mainly they form by sexual reproduction, which male and female reproductives have fused to form zygote. Zygote, one single cell with total number of chromosomes, pass through mitosis to form two cells, and again these two cells divide to form 4 and 8, and so number of cell increases, make a group of cell. The group of cell we call it tissue, and the first formed tissue we call it primary tissue, and this primary tissue is apical meristematic tissue, which origin of all body parts in plant body. Lie basically at the growing points of the roots and stem of the mature plant. Simply we draw a plant like this, part of plant above the ground like root shoot system, under the ground root system, but at the growing points, at the tips of each root and top of each branch and stem, there is apical meristematic tissue. Meristematic tissue may also exist in other locations in the body of plants, such as the bases and top points of nodes. Nodes, they are growing points of plant in which a new branch grow, or a leaf or a flower or any part grow. These growing points, we call them as nodes, or bases of leaves, which are known as the intercalary meristematic tissue. How at the top of stem there is apical meristematic tissue, at the growing points there is intercalary meristematic tissue. There are also other tissues that occur parallel to the long axis of plant body. They are called lateral meristematic tissue. If we take a cross section, this part of plant, we see a spherical structure, but parallel to outer surface there is lateral meristematic tissue, which add new circles each year for secondary growth or to make increased diameter of plant. So there are three types of meristematic, which is primary tissue according to their location. At the top, apical meristematic tissue, growing points, late intercalary, and the parallel to the outer surface for secondary growth is lateral meristematic tissue. The meristematic tissue turn gradually to become permanent tissue. We said meristematic tissue is primary tissue, but the tissues which are originated from meristematic tissue, they are known as permanent tissues, as in this case with the tissue of growing pieces or tips or top or lateral buds. The meristematic tissue does not usually or totally transform into permanent tissue, but some of these cells are remain for regeneration. Why? Because meristematic tissue transform into permanent tissue, they lost their ability of division, no more division, so there are no more meristematic tissue. I call it permanent tissue. But to form new plant's body and recover some body parts, some cells stays for regeneration. Classification of plant tissues. The different types of tissue that build the plant body fall into four major types. Meristematic tissue, when we studied, we said located at the plant part of high cellular division. So any part of plant cells divide or division is fast, misgrow happen, there is meristematic tissue. So the function is cell division. By cell division, increasing in number of cells and provide growth for plants. Epidermis, different parts of plants. This different part of plant means roots, leaves, stems, and flowers, all covered by one single layered tissue. We call it epidermis, and also originated from meristematic tissue. Forming the cortex, which has many functions like providing plant protection. We take a cross section from that part of plant, like outermost layer is epidermis, but epidermis plants age, the thickness of epidermis increases, some dead cells and living cells, so it make a thicker layer with inner layer known as cortex, and outermost generally in structure the main function is protection. Another function is gas exchange of gases through stomata. We can remember stomata are tiny openings in green parts of plants for CO2 and O2 exchange, and water absorption through roots from the soil. Also they are part of what? Part of epidermis. Vascular tissue, xylem and phloem, two main part of vascular tissue. It comes from vessels, the transport system of plant body. So we said in cross section, if we have been observed the plant body in previous years, you may see a shape like this, which form the xylem and phloem, but separated by line of epidermis. The outer part is phloem, while the inner part is xylem. and between them one layer of meristematic tissue to form new xylem, new phloem for each year. This phloem and xylem, they are long tubes which extend from root of the plant to the top of the plant. Different part of plant which contain xylem and phloem may contain vascular tissue. We can say roots, leaves, stem, or flowers, fruits, they all have these systems. And so there are two main types of this two, phloem and xylem. The basic function is to transport water and nutrients, maybe store some materials, and also support the plant body. What about the ground tissue? All what we see in the plant body, what is remaining, we not colored it, is ground tissue. So maybe in center, ground tissue location in root, stem, leaves in the form of cortex, which is outer layer under the epidermis, pith, the central structure or central tissue is pith, cortex, like a layer of ground tissue, a thick layer, but just under the epidermis, and pith rays which extend from pith to the cortex, pith rays. Means meristematic tissue cover vascular tissue there, like vessels in plant body, epidermis, skin, meristematic tissue, all found in growing points, but remain all tissue, internal tissue masses, they are ground tissue. So for major types of tissues in plant body, the first one is meristematic tissue. Consists of undifferentiated cells, this tissue. So they have ability of division actively and rapidly, so plant growth in plant is fast. So any part of plant which need growth or growth takes place contain meristematic tissue. By this growth, if it is apical meristematic tissue, it giving rise to the roots and stems, make stem or roots longer. From the buds, growing points, intercalate meristematic tissue to form new plant body parts, giving thickness to the roots and stem about lateral meristematic tissue. Generally, meristematic tissue does not stop functioning, because when function is stopped, we call it permanent tissue in main top parts of plant. And according to their location, there are three main parts of meristematic tissue. We said giving rise to the stems about apical meristematic tissue. Growing to the buds, form new body parts is about intercalary meristematic tissue, and thickness about lateral meristematic tissue. Table show us location and function of apical, lateral, and intercalary meristematic tissue. One more time, if you review, apical meristematic tissue found in the tips of the roots and stems of the plant, as we sign it on the growing points to make roots and stem or branches are longer. Gives growth in the tips of roots and stem of the plant. Lateral meristematic tissue, the lateral side of the plant extended parallel to the outer periderm. Periderm, the epidermis in aged plants, loses its elasticity and some cells die, so replace it with periderm tissue, also means skin. It consists of vesicle cambium. You remember we said the xylem and phloem, but with them a tissue produces new xylem and new phloem for new year vascular cambium. The secondary growth and thickness in plants is provided with lateral meristematic tissue by formation of secondary xylem and secondary phloem. We know when we take the cross section from the plant body we see circles. Each of this circle consists of xylem, phloem, and vascular cambium. And each year, two circles are formed. These new circles are added by vascular cambium, so adding new circles increasing in diameter. Intercalary meristematic tissue found between the permanent tissue in plant body, removed from the growing ends or growing points with about apical meristematic tissue. If you remember, we said apical meristematic tissue is the primary tissue and origin of all other tissues. And cells in this region has ability to divide rapidly and actively. So necessary hormones are produced in apical meristematic tissue for growth. So the growing of apical meristematic tissue has effect also on intercalary and also or lateral meristematic tissue. Of the nodes as in nodes of many monocotyledon plants, which will be discussed in chapter 3. Ground tissue, the most abundant tissue which form internal tissue masses in different plants' body. We study on three main types of that tissue. The first one is parenchyma tissue. The cells are living cells. They have thin cell walls. They are often polygonal or spherical in shape. A causes question why they are polygonal or spherical in shape due to the pressure of neighboring cells. The pressure of cells on one another, so cause what to be in different shapes. There are intercellular space between that cells. The parenchyma cell may contain plastids, so we call them chlorenchyma tissues, and have several functions like ventilation, which means air circulation in plant body, in leaves, storage of material like storage of food in carrot or fruits or different parts of plant, and delivery of nutrients, transporting of nutrients which produced in photosynthesis in short distances are provided by parenchyma tissue. This point which I signed, they are needed to compare the parenchyma with other types of ground tissue. Collenchyma tissue consists of elongated cells in which we said parenchyma cells are polygonal in shape. They have irregular thickened cell wall, but we said in parenchyma cells there are thin cell walls. And one extra information, any part of plant we say thick cell wall means function related to support. These tissues occur in the woody parts of plants, in woodiness part plants which have secondary growth when they mainly live for many seasons. They also exist in the major organs of herbal plants, herbal which generally live for one season, but not new and young plant plants. The old major part of herbal plants also contain collenchyma. Tissue is the primary supporting tissue in many stems and leaves, especially in mature ones, as we said in that part. The collenchyma tissue is rarely occurs in the roots and leaves of monocotyledon plants because we said they are generally herbaceous plants. The main function of collenchyma tissue is to provide structural support and also give strength. Means not only solidity but a bit flexibility is added to the plant by support of collenchyma tissue. The thick walls of the cells and their distribution of this thickness help tissue to do its function. As we remember, the shape and structure of cell is adapted to its function. Sclerenchyma tissue is composed of dead cells with extremely thick cell wall because the cell wall has lignin. We may remember from chapter 1 that the cell wall consists of cellulose, but after secondary wall is thickened with lignin, which is a waterproof substance. When material transport stops in between cytoplasm and environment, the cells die. The cells of the sclerenchyma tissue are highly differentiated, which means dead cells. They differ from each other in shape, origin, composition, and formation. The main function of this tissue is structural support, but there is no strength. So when we talk about it, we said collenchyma tissue is flexible support, but sclerenchyma tissue inflexible support. There are two main types of cells in sclerenchyma tissue. The cells, the fibers, they are long and cylindrical cells with thick cell wall. They are dead cells. They found individually or in bundles in the part of plant anywhere which need support. So if asked about the location of fibers of sclerenchyma tissue in plant body, in any part of woody part of plant which need support. The sclerites, the cells which are relatively short, how the fibers are long, they are shorter cells. They found in some kind of fruits like such as pears and quinces. Epidermis is the tissue that covers the plant body and forms the permanent dermal tissue. Dermal means about the skin of plant or outermost layer of plant body. It consists of one single layer of group of cell with thickened cell wall which cover the primary body of the plant. Secondary part of body and or epidermis can be replaced with periderm as plants age. So primary body covering is epidermis, but secondary is periderm. The dermal cells are flat and tightly linked to each other without intercellular space between them. That's why do provide a function of protection. So it protects the plant body, regulate gas exchange through stomata in leaves, and water absorption in through roots of plants. Epidermis tissue is a permanent tissue, not primary tissue, and also it originated from meristematic tissue cells. Vascular tissue are specialized in transporting water and nutrients through the body of plant in addition to provide structural support. Means for vascular tissue there are two main functions. One of them transportation of water and nutrients, and second is to provide the structural support. General function for vascular tissue. The existence of vascular tissue is one of the most distinguishing features of most kind of plants, because plants are classified according to having this vascular tissue as vascular tissue and non-vascular plants. The vascular tissue includes two main types, xylem tissue and phloem tissue. Xylem tissue is derived, means originated from rectangular meristematic cells. Another kind of question in ministry exam is about the origin structures. Xylem tissue. The xylem tissue is derived, means originated from rectangular meristematic cells. It shows the origin of xylem tissue. Another ministry exam question types is about the origin of some structures. During their development, the meristematic cells elongate, have great increase in size and longer. When they reach the maturity, they lose their living components, cytoplasm and cell organelles, and finally they become dead cell. And to do their function, they adapt to their function, they lose their cytoplasm, nucleus, and other organelles. So xylem tissue consists of generally dead cells. The xylem tissue is composed of various components different in structure and function. As you remember, said plant tissues generally consist of different types of cells. Xylem vessels and tracheids. Xylem fibers, which we remember fibers from sclerenchyma tissue. Any part we see fibers, function of this tissue is support, and parenchyma tissue as function of storage. Xylem vessels differentiate in many types according to type of plant. These types are vary according to the way of thickness. The tracheids are characterized by their pointed endings, like xylem vessels has a plate or flat ending, but after also it dissolves between cells, they lose cytoplasm and they act a long pipe. But tracheids, pointed ends like this, they have a sharp end. That's how they are different from the xylem vessel, but they function both of them same to transport water with all the dissolved nutrients in it in plant body. It shows the tracheids and xylem tissue. In xylem vessels, we said that there are some structure known as pits. They are holes in the walls of xylem elements to provide material exchange with neighboring cells, which especially water and dissolved materials. Phloem tissue is composed of several types of cell. This type of cell are sieve tube elements, companion cells, which always they work with sieve tube elements, phloem fibers, which have function of support, and phloem parenchyma, also involved in short dense material transport. All this type of phloem cells have features in common. How? In function, they all specialize in transporting of nutrients produced by the leaves, means in photosynthesis, but only fibers, they have function of structural support. We need that points to compare the phloem tissue with xylem tissue. We compare them according to their component, types of cells, according to their function, which xylem transport water and dissolved substance, but phloem tissue transporting the nutrients which produced by leaves by photosynthesis process. And xylem tissue four parts, but from these four major components, three of them, like xylem vessels, tracheids, xylem fibers, they are all dead cells, but only parenchymal cells are living. So xylem generally consists of dead cells, in which the phloem tissue, sieve tubes, companion cells, and phloem parenchyma are living, but only phloem fibers are dead cells. So in comparison, we said phloem tissue generally made up of living cells, in which the xylem tissue generally consists. Table show the type of cell in each plant tissue with their function. Meristematic tissue cells, they are undifferentiated cells which have ability to transform any kind of cell in plant body. Their function is to producing new cells to increase the thickness and the length of the plant. Ground tissue consists of parenchyma cells, which function is photosynthesis, because some parenchymatous cells have chloroplast or plastic in their structure. We call them chlorenchyma, and they function in photosynthesis. And also breathing, like ventilation or storage. Chlorenchyma tissue cells, they have flexible support because they are primary supportive tissue in plant body, and sclerenchyma cells, which consist of extremely thick cell wall, they have provided inflexible support for plants. Epidermis consists of epidermis cells, which is a bit long with thick wall and no intercellular space, to provide function of protection, regulating of gas exchange in stems and leaves through stomata, and absorption of water and salts through roots. Vascular tissue has two main types, like xylem and phloem. Xylem has four main components: xylem vessels, which transport water and minerals; tracheids, which also transport water and minerals; xylem parenchyma, which provide function of storage; and xylem fibers, which have function of support. Phloem tissue consists of also four main components: the sieve tube elements, transporting the organic particles through the plant body; companion cells, they make company with sieve tube elements, work with them, so they transporting the carbohydrates from or to the sieve tube elements, which phloem fibers have function of structural support. What about the phloem parenchyma tissue? It can provide function of storage or delivery of nutrients in short distance